Welcome, everybody. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 162 of the Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd now like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. Pursuant to Standing Order 83.1 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 26, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on the pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2025 budget. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses and thank you for your patience. We did have a vote, so we are starting a little after our regular time. So with us from the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, no stranger to this committee, President and Chief Executive Officer Mike Mueller, welcome. From the C.D. Howe Institute, we have its President and Chief Executive Officer William Robson is joining us via video conference. From Chin Radio TV International, which we all know, its General Manager Francesco Di Candia, welcome, sir. From Diabetes Canada, its Executive Director and Government Affairs, Advocacy and Policy, and former MP and former MPP, Glenn Thibault, is joining us. Welcome. Welcome, Glenn. From the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, we have its Director of Domestic Policy, Timothy Sargent. And Timothy, if some of you have been on many other committees, has been a Deputy Minister of the government, as also, and I think in finance, fisheries, and
agriculture.
And agriculture, yes. So now you're wearing a different hat here with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute as its Director of Domestic Policy. Welcome. And from the Quikitanni Inuit Association, we have its Senior Director of Inuit Relations, Virginia Mearns. Welcome. And Assistant Executive Director of Marine and Wildlife Conservation, Richard Patton. Welcome to our committee. So on that, witnesses, you'll each have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks before we get into members' questions. We are starting with the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, and Mr. Mueller, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's great to be back. Aerospace, by its nature, is a highly competitive field. It is also a critical and strategic industry for Canada, fueling innovation, economic growth, and supporting well-paying, family-sustaining jobs right across the country. Canada's aerospace industry is already a major engine of the economy, contributing over $29 billion to our GDP and exporting $19 billion. And right now, more than 200,000 hardworking Canadians across this country rely on aerospace to support their families. Like any competitive field, aerospace requires smart and supportive public policy to survive. Without supportive and strategic public policies, we'd likely have no automotive sector, many of our natural resources would remain untapped, and we'd have no railways to move our manufacturers' goods, minerals, and grains to market. Just as strategic policies have enabled these sectors to thrive, an aerospace industrial strategy for Canada will help us reach new heights in this country. However, without political leadership and supportive policy, our aerospace industry risks losing ground on both the domestic and international stage. Despite its strategic importance for Canada, our aerospace sector is at a crossroad, facing opportunities for growth, but also significant policy challenges. This includes a tax on aerospace manufacturing that is killing jobs and the domestic market for our industry. For 3 years, I've been before this committee to raise concerns about the potential impacts of this tax. While it was introduced with the intent of collecting revenue, the reality is that it's a job-killing manufacturing tax that's damaging both our sector, the economy, while undermining Canada's international reputation. Despite multiple assessments, reports, and warnings, the facts are now clear. By the government's own account, the luxury tax has cost taxpayers $19 million to administer. By the government's own account, only $15 million has been collected related to aircraft. Industry estimates that it has lost over $1.8 billion in sales. According to a report from Professor Waugh, those sales would have generated potentially $90 million in GST revenue for the government. Most troubling, according to the government's own finance department, jobs will be lost, and according to our estimates, this tax is putting nearly 4,000 well-paying aerospace jobs at risk across Canada. So the facts are clear. Government is bringing in $15 million on the backs of industry and its workers. It costs them $19 million to administer, and they're losing GST revenue to the potential tune of $90 million, not to mention the nearly 4,000 Canadian workers and families this tax puts at risk, which is why unions, and I know you've heard from them before, representing aerospace workers are also in favor of repealing this tax on manufacturing specific to aircraft. I'm here before you again today, urging this committee and all parties to reconsider the implications of this tax and take immediate action to repeal it, to safeguard the aerospace sector and protect the thousands of Canadians who depend on it. This brings me to the opportunities that an aerospace industrial strategy for Canada will bring. Minister Champagne recently announced the government's commitment to develop an industry aerospace strategy for Canada. And recognizing that aerospace is strategic for Canada, I think is a nonpartisan issue. And we are calling on all parties to support an aerospace industrial strategy. With forecasts projected the need for 40,000 new aircraft in the coming decades, a strategy can potentially, and just a small number of things, do the following. Enhance defense and national security by addressing procurement delays and identifying key capabilities, enabling Canada to meet its defense commitments and operationalize and institutionalize the goals of the recently released DPU. By prioritizing Transport Canada certification, sustainable aviation fuels, and programs like SHRED, innovation can thrive while reducing the industry's carbon footprint and be able to compete globally. Because of the political leadership shown in the past, we are one of a few select countries that can design, build, and certify an aircraft from nose to tail. We cannot let this ability slip away. It must be supported and funded properly. This committee has the ability to shine a light on this, and we should not cede this ability to other competitor nations. A strategy should also address labor market challenges and help industry create well-paying, family-sustaining jobs, helping build a robust talent pipeline now and for the future. In closing, we urgently need to repeal the harmful, job-killing tax on aerospace manufacturing, as well as develop and adopt an aerospace industrial strategy for Canada. It cannot be overstated that these should be supported by all parties. They should be economic priorities that will shape the future of our country for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. And now we'll hear from the C.D. Howe Institute. Mr. Robson, please. Unmute. Yep.
Apologies for that. It's an honor to be with you today, and I do want to commend the work of your staff in helping me connect. I was a troublesome participant, but they handled it very elegantly. I'd be very glad to answer your questions on federal fiscal policy generally. The stagnation of Canadian productivity and earnings is now a lively topic of conversation. I will say that a decade of weak business investment has left us in a very unusual situation where the stock of productive capital per worker is falling. I have provided the committee with copies of the C.D. Howe Institute's most recent report on that topic, and I think federal fiscal policy, among other things, could help. I'd also be happy, and I've circulated copies of the Institute's most recent annual shadow federal budget. It contains a number of ideas that I think could help to spur economic growth and investment. Again, I'd be happy to answer questions on any of those topics. Some of the measures in our investment report and the shadow budget are contentious, but in my opening time with you now, I hope I can touch on something that should not be contentious. It should not attract a lot of sort of partisan division, and that's the need for government finances to be transparent and for government financial documents and particularly budgets to be on time. Too many people find government finances mysterious. The basics should not be mysterious to anyone who is motivated and can read a few numbers. I think that budgets and estimates and public accounts documents should present the key information straightforwardly and upfront. That does everyone a service if a non-expert can pick them up or open them online and quickly and confidently get the essentials. If budgets and other documents obscure the key numbers or bury them so deep that a non-expert can't find them, they do us a disservice. People can give up, they can disengage. Worse, they may suspect that the obscurity is deliberate and that they can't trust what is in the budget or the public accounts. Timeliness matters also. Budgets and estimates should come out together. This is a familiar topic, I know, in Parliament. They should come out together before the fiscal year begins, well before it. Parliamentarians should be able to consider the fiscal plan and individual items in the estimates before the money is spent. And public accounts and annual reports for their part should come out shortly after the fiscal year ends while the information is fresh and before the opportunity to address any problems they reveal gets stale. The federal government for many years set a good example with the quality of its budgets and its public accounts. And it was for many years notable for producing timely budgets, but lately the federal government has not set a good example. There was no budget at all in 2020. The budgets in 21 and 2022 appeared in April after the fiscal year had begun. In 2023, the budget appeared on the 28th of March, which is much too short for Parliament to consider the fiscal plan before the year starts, 2024, April 16th. We need only look as far as Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island to see provinces where budgets, regardless of the party in power, appear before April 1st consistently. The next federal budget should appear in February, as federal budgets used to do, and its successors should do likewise. A word on presentation. The federal government's grade in the CD Howe Institute's annual report card on fiscal accountability and transparency. It's recovered from the F it received after no budget in 2020, but it is only getting Ds and C minuses. One point that I would emphasize is that the key numbers appear hundreds of pages of deep in an annex. The rare non-expert who perseveres to find them may find them unclear because some major pension costs are shown below the line. And the federal government does not present its main estimates and its budget together, and the accounting in the two documents does not match. So these problems are challenges for parliamentarians and the public. I said already, they discourage engagement and encourage cynicism, and they're unnecessary. Many provinces and territories do better. In our latest report card, Saskatchewan and Alberta were in the A range. We're finalizing this year's report card, and it looks as though Yukon will also be an A grade jurisdiction this year. So the federal government should join them at the top of the class. Thank you for your invitation to be with you and for your attention, and I look forward to your comments and your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Robson, and there'll be, I'm sure, many questions from the members. Now we're going to hear from Chin Radio TV International. And I'll tell you, members, I grew up, when I first got to Toronto, I was 2 years old, and my parents, their first place was almost across the street from Chin Radio. And I know Lenny Lombardi, your president and CEO, it's his birthday, I guess, today? Yeah, it's Halloween, and it's Lenny Lombardi's birthday. So congratulations to him. And now we're going to hear from General Manager DeCandia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Canada's history of settlement and colonization has resulted in a multicultural society made up of three founding peoples, Indigenous, French, and British, and of many other racial and ethnic groups. Chin Radio reaches over 100 cultural communities in more than 50 languages within the Greater Metropolitan Toronto and Southern Ontario areas on Chin FM 100.7, Chin AM 1540, and Chin FM 91.9, and in the Ottawa-Gatineau region on Chin 97.9 FM. The contribution of Chin to the cause of multiculturalism is to understand, embrace, and celebrate our cultural diversity between people of national, racial, and religious origins. In today's multicultural society, it is crucial to be able to reach all ethnic groups in our country and to be able to explain to them in their own language any type of message. This is why the Canadian government has many publications and programs that are translated in different languages. In Ontario, almost 26% of the province's population identifies as a visible minority group. In the city of Ottawa, 24% of the population are born outside the country, and in the Ottawa-Gatineau area, over 50% of the population identify as other than English or French. Multiculturalism in Canada has established as a unique society, keenly aware and respectful of our cultural diversity as a nation and through the success of our multicultural policies, respectful of the importance of inclusion for all peoples in Canada. Ethnic media has played and continues to play a vital role in supporting multiculturalism in Canada. For over 70 years, ethnic media has helped new Canadians interpret the world and society around them, made them feel welcomed, informed, and entertained in their new home. We believe the government should do more to help ethnic media achieve these goals. Unfortunately, ethnic media has not been held in equal status as mainstream media when considering budget expenditures for media campaigns. Government spending in ethnic media is vastly disproportionate than what mainstream media enjoys, largely due to the built-in bias of the dairy audience measurements methods used by advertising agencies. These agencies typically rely on established surveying companies such as Numeris, which is the sole provider of audience measurement data for television and radio broadcasters in Canada. Audience numbers are accumulated through the diary methodology, which is only provided in two official languages, English and French. Unfortunately, for ethnic broadcasters, this is an immediate disqualifier if the survey is not provided in the mother tongue of the household. This presents a language barrier and would corrupt the findings. In addition, surveys conducted by phone face the same dilemma. If the respondent has a language barrier, then the call is terminated. Even if the individual broadcasters create their own survey, it is often rejected by agencies as being proprietary. The end result is that ethnic media, in particular radio and TV broadcasters, are not even considered by advertising agencies due to the lack of measurement, not because of lack of audience. Getting the measurement of multicultural audiences correctly has long been a struggle for the industry. It cannot be stressed enough of the vital importance of ethnic media to effectively reach audiences with information essential to successful integration into Canadian society. Often, ethnic media is the only source of important information available in mother tongue, a service not provided by mainstream media outlets. Many ministers in the government have had and keep having from time to time segments in our shows. They value the direct connection that they can establish through Chin Radio with different ethnic groups we serve. If the benefits of ethnic media are important to sustain, then we believe the government should consider ways in which this great resource can be encouraged and grow. It is important that the federal government support ethnic media. This doesn't necessarily mean that more funds be allocated to the advertising budget. The government should direct third-party advertising agencies to dispense the budget and allocate a minimum of 15% of the overall yearly advertising budget to ethnic media. This would be the right move towards being more inclusive of the multicultural media outlets. And inclusion is not just a smart thing to do, it is also the right thing to do. This distribution of funds would permit the government to make a more targeted effort to convey a message to certain ethnic groups and reach out to the many diverse ethnic entities living in Canada in a very proactive and dynamic way. With ethnicity and languages, I conclude it's an ongoing process. We have mostly an open-door immigration policy. The government is pursuing an ambitious plan to welcome 395,000 immigrants in 2025, 380,000 in 2026, and 365,000 in 2027. So that's a door that's not going to close anytime soon. It's going to continue well in the future years to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. DeCandia. And now we're going to hear from Diabetes Canada. Mr. Thibault, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to thank the committee for inviting me to testify today. For the more than 4 million people living with diabetes in Canada, access to affordable medications and devices is critical. In fact, The out-of-pocket costs for things like medications, devices, and supplies can be as high as $18,000 per year if individuals are solely reliant on public coverage. I will therefore focus my remarks on two areas: the implementation and funding provided for diabetes medications under Canada's new National Pharmacare program, and the need for investments to support the National Diabetes Device Access Fund. So, as we know, earlier this month, Bill C-64 received royal assent, creating the framework for a national pharmacare program, which is a good first step. However, many of Diabetes Canada's concerns remain unresolved. During the parliamentary debate on Bill C-64, Diabetes Canada emphasized that the best approach to establishing a national pharmacare program would be to initially focusing on helping people who lack adequate coverage for their prescribed treatment regimes, and to ensure there's no disruptions to their private coverage. We recommended the inclusion of a provision very similar to the dental care legislation to clarify that a federal pharmacare program will not jeopardize the current system, and we remain concerned about potential unintended consequences of the legislation. We have also raised concerns with the current draft formulary for diabetes medications, as they do not align with Diabetes Canada's clinical practice guidelines, called CPGs, which are developed to inform general patterns of care and public policy. Diabetes is a complex condition that has a constantly expanding list of new therapies and medications, and those medications and therapies should be available and covered as options of care. Within the legislation that's passed, the Minister of Health is now required to direct the Canada Drug Agency to compile a list of essential medicines that will inform the national formulary. As such, Diabetes Canada continues to call for an immediate expansion and update of the background formulary to reflect the CPGs so that people living with diabetes can access the medications they need to support their best possible health outcomes. We are also calling for an increase to the baseline funding to ensure that the program meets the needs of persons living in Canada with diabetes. If the program is truly a single-payer universal system, then the initial budget 2024 allocation of $1.5 billion over 5 years, which covers both diabetes medications and contraceptions medications, that will not provide a sufficient basis of funding for this program to operate properly. And so let me explain. The estimated yearly cost of diabetes medications assessed by the private health insurance industry is over $1.6 billion per year. And in 2023, public spending on diabetes medications was $1.8 billion, so close to $3.5 billion per year just for diabetes medications alone. So beyond pharmacare, I also want to speak about the importance of establishing a national diabetes device fund, which the government committed to last February. 1/4 of the people living with diabetes have reported that the additional cost of diabetes devices affects their adherence to their prescribed treatment regimes, which has significant risks to their short and long-term health. Over the past few years, Diabetes Canada has worked with many provinces and territories to expand affordable access to diabetes devices, and we are proud of this work to increase access and are keen to see further expansion of these programs. However, since last February, we have seen what I would describe as stasis, as provinces and territories await further details from the federal government about the device access program before further expanding their programs. That is why it's critical that the government urgently provide more details on its intentions with respect to a federal device and equipment access program as quickly as possible. Personally, as someone who lives with type 2 diabetes, I know how dramatically my device has improved my quality of life and ability to manage and control my diabetes effectively. The use of devices and equipment that helps individuals manage their diabetes also contributes to a broader savings in the healthcare system. We also believe further savings could be seen across the country if there is further action undertaken to implement the federal framework for diabetes in Canada. In closing, by providing that common policy direction through the framework for multi-sectoral stakeholders, as well as provincial and territorial governments, we can identify gaps in current approaches, avoid duplicating efforts, and provide opportunities for monitoring and reporting on progress. And those 6 framework components would not only improve the quality of life for those 4 million people living in Canada with diabetes, but will save the system dollars. Therefore, I look forward to working with members of this committee to ensure that the upcoming budget reflects these realities for the people living with Diabetes Canada, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Thibault. And now we'll hear from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and Mr. Sargent.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation to appear today on behalf of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So it's no secret that Canada's economic performance has been mediocre over the last few years. Living standards have stagnated, with real income per capita growing only at 0.4% per annum between 2015 and 2023. Only a third of the growth between 2005 and 2015, which is a period that includes the financial crisis. The culprit is Canada's anemic growth in productivity, the amount of output each worker produces an hour. Indeed, productivity and growth in the business sector seems to have gone into reverse, with productivity in the second quarter of this year slightly lower than it was in the first quarter of 2019. This is in stark contrast to the United States, where productivity is now 10% above 2019 levels. It also means that Canada is now close to the bottom of the advanced country productivity league table, with productivity levels well below not just the United States, but all of the Northern and Western European countries, such as the UK, France, and Germany, and even slightly lower than Italy. It's no wonder that Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, made it clear in a speech in March that Canada faces a productivity emergency. So what should the federal government do to respond to this emergency? Well, the regulatory burden on business is a huge drag on investment and innovation. It's particularly true in the resource sector. It can now take 10 to 15 years to build a mine in Canada, but it's something that affects the whole economy. The government should be more aggressive in requiring new regulations to be less onerous than the regulations that they replace, make greater use of mutual recognition so that products approved in other jurisdictions are automatically approved in Canada, and streamline the environmental assessment process to be more efficient and less vulnerable to legal challenge. Canada's tax burden is high and has been growing. Federal tax revenues rose from 13.4% of GDP in 2015-16 to projected 15.1% in 2024-25. Cutting taxes, particularly personal income taxes, would increase incentives to work and invest, as well as encouraging our best and brightest to remain in Canada. Meanwhile, the size of government has been growing significantly. At the federal level, the number of civil servants has grown by more than 40% since 2015. And total expenditures risen from 14.9% of GDP in 2015-16 to a projected 17.9% in 2024-25. This very significant increase in the footprint of government takes resources, both people and capital, away from the private sector. And because expenditures have grown even faster than tax revenues, Canada has gone from virtual balance in 2015-16 to a projected $40 billion deficit in 2024-25. With public debt charges of $54 billion, equal to all of GST revenues. While deficits are appropriate during a recession, when the economy is largely in balance as it is today, they make it easier for governments to avoid difficult trade-offs and push the burden of spending into the future. This means that putting Canada's fiscal house in order should be a high priority. The government needs to reduce the size of government so that taxes can be lowered and the federal budget brought back to balance. An obvious place to look for savings would be subsidies to business, which have risen massively with no appreciable effect on productivity. Another place to look is areas where the federal government is intruding into areas of provincial jurisdiction. Governments should stick to their constitutional lanes, which makes it clear who is accountable for what. Accelerating immigration, particularly of temporary foreign workers, is another important contributor to our recent productivity problems. A rapid influx of new workers means less capital per worker and therefore lower productivity. Furthermore, many of these incoming workers have lower productivity than the average Canadian worker, and that also pulls down productivity. And this is in addition to the strain that the rapid increase in immigration has put on public services such as healthcare and education, and on the housing market. It's therefore imperative to reduce levels of both permanent and especially temporary immigration and refocus the system on highly skilled permanent residents. Finally, there is one area where higher government spending is not only warranted but urgently required, and that is defence. Whoever wins the US presidential election next week will expect Canada to rapidly attain our 2% target. And I expect that the US will use the CUSMA renegotiation discussions to put pressure on us in this regard. Canada should make a virtue of necessity and have a credible plan to meet the 2% target by 2028 and ensure that the increased spending is directed towards promoting innovation in Canada's defence industry, a sector where Canada has many strengths that can be built on, which is the source of many high-paying jobs. To conclude on an optimistic note, Canada has many advantages that other advanced countries would love to have. The world desperately wants what we produce, from oil and natural gas to agricultural products to nuclear power technology to aircraft to defence material. We are also next door to and have privileged access to the world's largest economy. We should be doing so much better than we are, and we can, but it will require a federal government that is smaller, interferes less in the economy, and is more focused on delivering its core responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. And now to the Kikitani Inuit Association and Ms. Mearns. And I apologize if I mispronounced the name. If you can help us out and just pronounce that for us so we all get it right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You did very well with the pronunciation on that, so congratulations. Today I'll be speaking to 3 areas that our organization has submitted as recommendations for consideration in the upcoming budget. And they include Nautilsuqtiit Conservation Centers, the Iqaluit Nukiksautit Hydro Project, and the need for the continued investment in a distinctions-based Inuit-led fund for infrastructure in Nunavut. Before I speak to the specific recommendations, I would like to briefly provide you some background and context, with hopes that it helps to better understand the submission that is before you. Kikitani Inuit Association is a designated Inuit organization established under the Nunavut Agreement to represent Inuit in the Kikitani region of Nunavut. We represent Inuit in 13 communities, which are situated in the easternmost portion of Nunavut. QIA advances the rights and benefits of Inuit through protecting and promoting social, political, economic, and cultural interests, while safeguarding the land, waters, and resources that sustain our communities. Through QIA's leadership, Inuit completed the Kikitani Truth Commission, which was a broad inquiry documenting the harms and hardships faced by Inuit as a result of the implementation of colonial policies, which eventually resulted in formal recognition from the Government of Canada, along with a commitment to partner on the implementation of 25 recommendations. QIA has a long-standing record of providing effective programming and services for Inuit in the region. These programs and services have been made possible through a variety of means, including a strong relationship with the Government of Canada over the past years. As articulated in the pre-budget submission, Nautilsuqtiit Conservation Centers are an integral part of the Nautilsuqtiit program. Please allow me to share the context as to why these facilities are of such importance to Inuit and how these investments link directly to creation of permanent jobs, for which employment funding is already secured across all 13 of our communities. The basic premise is that people need a place to work. Everyone in this room have offices and associated infrastructure to support them to do their jobs. This is what we are seeking to achieve for Nautilsuqtiit, for our staff in every community to work out of Nautilsuqtiit centers. Just as importantly, the Nautilsuqtiit centers also provide a space for other organizations who want to provide community programs and services. There is such a shortage of such available infrastructure that communities often end up missing out. Nautilsulti is founded on Inuit stewardship and led by our communities. This program has created a great opportunity to advance Inuit vision to improve community well-being, economic prosperity, and the health of their lands, waters, and wildlife. The program provides Inuit jobs as environmental stewards and harvesters. It also provides a foundation for mentorship, training, and economic development for Inuit. Nautilsulti carry out critical environmental and wildlife monitoring in and around the communities that they are employed in. While on patrols, Nautilsulti are able to carry out harvests, which results in country food distributions in the communities, which also helps to address food security, but also enables the strengthening and retention of Inuit traditional practices. They also provide workshops geared toward youth, where knowledge and skills are passed on to the younger generation. One of QIA's most recent achievements with the federal government is the establishment of an Inuit-led conservation economy founded on the co-management of Dalrotiu Imanga, an area created through successful negotiation of an Inuit Impact and Benefit Agreement with the Government of Canada in 2019. Since this time, QIA has partnered with philanthropic organizations and the Government of Canada through a project called Qikirtani Project Finance for Permanence, or QPFP, with an express goal to ensure all 13 communities will participate in the conservation economy. QIA expects formal announcements associated with the QPFP will occur in December of 2024. While QIA has been extremely successful in acquiring funding for Nautilsulti jobs and Nautilsulti centers in nearly all of our communities, we are now focused upon addressing the remaining resources required to construct the final Nautilsulti centers. Because infrastructure funding typically flows differently than funding for employment, QIA is actively taking parallel efforts to align resources toward our end goal. Once the final resources required for Nautilsulti centers are secured, QIA will have aligned enough resources to execute upon a pathway that results in the creation of 120 long-term jobs for Inuit spread across the region. Jobs that will provide country food for the community, take youth out on the land, and actively monitor the environment. To be clear, the funding requested for the Nautilsulti centers in QIA's pre-budget submission will be used to secure the final 3 Nautilsulti centers. For the Iqaluit Nukiksautit Hydro Project, it's an Inuit-led project that aims to identify opportunities to improve energy security while reducing greenhouse gas emissions for Inuit in the city of Iqaluit by harnessing nearby renewable energy. The project will seek capacity on the part of Inuit to minimize risks, vulnerabilities, and harms to the environment and social networks that are central to Inuit culture. The project aims to bring Inuit closer to energy sovereignty, environmental sustainability, and affordability. Our final priority speaks to a shared goal among Inuit organizations in Nunavut. Today, we are asking the Government of Canada to make a renewed investment in flexible, distinctions-based infrastructure funding for Inuit organizations. As you know, Nunavut faces a substantial infrastructure gap that negatively impacts quality of life, access to services, and economic opportunity for Inuit. The Government of Canada has committed several times to close the infrastructure gap by 2030. Inuit are ready to lead on infrastructure and can see that when we are given freedom and flexibility to do so, we make smart, forward-looking decisions for the health of our communities. In our submission, QIA, along with 3 other Nunavut Inuit organizations, asked for continued investment in distinctions-based Inuit-led fund for Nunavut infrastructure at a rate of approximately $70 million per year over 6 years. This represents a continuation of the current level of funding, plus a small adjustment for inflation. QA believes that it is important that the government continue to maintain a distinctions-based funding program for infrastructure in Nunavut, whether as a renewal of the Indigenous Community Infrastructure Fund or the creation of a similar program. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Mearns. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opportunity for questions, and thank you to all the witnesses for your opening remarks. And we're going to get into questions right away, and we're starting with MP Kelly for the first 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Sargent, your opening statement was a damning indictment of the economic record of this government. We've just had a report of the third quarter is yet now the eighth out of nine consecutive quarters with negative per capita GDP growth. We see that per capita GDP is now lower in Canada than it was when this government took office. And the difference between American per capita GDP growth between Canada and the United States has never been worse. Can you comment on how the fiscal and regulatory policies of this government are making Canadians poorer?
Thank you for the question. So, Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, Canada's economic performance since 2015 has not been as good as the performance in the previous 10 years. The cost of the difference in income per capita amounts to around $4,000 per person had we continued on the same growth trajectory. Certainly, we had COVID during the recent period, but as I said earlier, we also had the great financial crisis in the earlier period, and COVID actually increased Canadian productivity because it had a bunch of people in relatively low productivity sectors that exited the labor market. During that period of the last 10 years, we've seen a very significant increase in government spending, in particular in subsidies to business and to others. We've seen increasing regulation, particularly in the resource sector. And, of course, we've had a very significant increase in immigration, particularly in permanent residents. And we just haven't seen any payback from those policies. Now, you could argue, well, maybe things would have been worse had we not pursued those policies. But the reality is, if we compare both to our neighbours and to our recent performance, we just haven't performed as well.
Okay, so today's or the recent report on the third quarter, which shows that per capita GDP is still declining. Is that the appropriate time to maintain the policy of the carbon tax and to proceed with increases, and also to increase the capital gains tax? We had testimony recently that the change to the capital gains tax could suppress the capital stock in Canada by $127 billion and result in a further reduction of GDP. The United States, if I understand, does not have any of these policies, and would this explain some of the discrepancy that we are seeing? And do you think that this is the time to continue to impose new taxes?
I think that the record is quite clear that we've seen very significant increase in taxes, the capital gains tax, we've had the carbon tax, and those just haven't produced the results, I think, that were hoped for. we've seen on the carbon tax that we haven't seen a very significant impact on emissions, for instance, from that tax. So I think the question now is this the right direction to go in? And indeed, if we look at the economies that are doing better, we look particularly at the United States, and particularly those parts of the United States that are growing fastest, such as the southern United States. Those are places that have lower taxes. They have lower taxes, they have smaller government, they have smarter regulation, less regulation, and they're growing faster. And so that would be a prescription that I would want to follow.
It's almost like Canada needs a government that lacks the tax and do something about the gatekeepers that are holding down the economy. Do you have some specific comments about regulation and different specific regulations? You've talked about the resource industry. How about C-69?
Well, certainly what we've seen from the Impact Assessment Act is we've seen almost no projects have gone through that system. I mean, I think there was a hope that it would streamline the system, that would make it quicker. But what we're actually seeing is all of the projects that are in that system now are stuck in the first two stages of the four-stage system. So we're just not seeing projects come out of that system. The time to open it, to build a mine, to move ahead on a research project, I mean, that is just getting longer and longer and longer. And the problem is in Canada, resources are the backbone of our economy. And so if we can't get these projects done, then of course our GDP per capita is going to fall.
Right. If I've got just time for another couple of questions, I'd like to shift to Mr. Robson. And we had, as I said, we had Dr. Mintz last week tell us that the carbon or the income, the capital gains tax increase is expected. He expects it to suppress capital stock by $127 billion. We also had testimony that it may result in the loss of up to 400,000 jobs. Mr. Robson, do you have your own research or modeling that would either support that conclusion, or what is your estimate of this policy change?
I think very highly of Jack Mintz, and in fact, the CD Howe Institute has a report from him underway right now. The direction is very clear. The magnitudes are open to debate, but there is no way that you could argue that an increase in the inclusion rate on capital gains that affects the entire corporate sector effectively, and many investors as well, is going to have any kind of positive impact. I agree with a lot of what Tim Sargent was saying just now. I think one thing that's worth highlighting is that the United States in 2017 had a very substantial tax reform that cut rates and reduced the number of distortions in their system. And anybody who doubts the importance of the corporate tax regime for investment just needs to look at what happened in the United States in the years since then and contrast it to what happened in Canada. It's clear that taxes do matter, and it's clear that the United States did something in those years that in my mind, helps to explain why the gap between us and the United States, which had been closing for many years before the middle of the last decade, has opened up since then.
Thank you, MP Kelly. Sorry, and now to MP Zarowitz, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all witnesses for the excellent presentations. I wish I was given an hour to ask all of you questions, because I have tons, but I'm actually going to start off by focusing on Chin. Thank you so much for being here. I have a riding that has about 50% first-generation Canadians, and I don't know what they would have done without Chin, educating them, informing them around news at all the different levels of government, including community, and then helping them to integrate over time as well. So I really appreciated your introductory remarks. I also heard from you that there's a key challenge that you felt exists where you felt that whether it's federal government or all levels of government are providing more support to mainstream media. And maybe my first question to you, Mr. DeCandia, is do you get advertising support from the federal government? And if so, could you articulate how much?
Yes. The federal government, we used to deal with them directly until 2023. And every year, the investment that was done through our media outlet has never been very high. Actually, It was less than $5,000 in Ottawa and pretty much the same amount of money in Toronto. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we had more investments because it was a matter of public health. So therefore, the government recognized that in order to reach all the Canadians, even those that have no access to the mainstream media, they had to use Chin Radio. The government, I believe, thinks that Chin Radio is the medium to reach all ethnic people in Canada. It's just that it seems that when it comes down to the marketing portion, there is someone that makes the decision to reserve only a very small, insignificant amount of money to our company or in general to the ethnic radio and TV broadcasters. I mean, one of the when in 2024. Cassette Communications took over the advertising campaigns with the federal government, we faced even further cuts to the point where it was really minimal. I can just mention that for Ottawa, for Canada Day, there was an investment of merely $2,000. And then, we had to, of course, produce the spots in the language, translate them, talent, production. So we had to charge another $2,000 for that. But in terms of campaign, $2,000, the average spot rate is $35. How many spots can you get for Canada Day, which is a staple? In every Canada Day, there's always a swearing in of new Canadians. And who are these new Canadians or newcomers to Canada become Canadians?
Thank you. I want to get to another person before I end with you, but I have one more quick question, and very quickly, please. What is your direct ask to our federal government?
We would like to, see at least an increase and something in the rounds of 15-20% in order to cover all the languages that we serve, all the communities we serve, sorry. And, we have more than 50 languages. So we definitely need, if you want to do a target campaign, we need more investments for sure.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the great service that Chin does to our nation. I want to turn my attention to Mr. Robson. And just a general comment, Mr. Chair, I know there's a bit of a conversation about our economy, and often my Conservative colleagues make it seem like our economy is awful and in the tanks. And so I will say to you that we have heard testimony at this committee where the carbon tax is not responsible for all the price increases in Canada. We've also heard testimony that the capital gains tax, when it was increased during the Mulroney years, did not end up having a negative impact on innovation and productivity. But I don't have time to go into that. I do want to talk about productivity specifically, and my question to Mr. Robson is the following. Australia in the 1990s, they actually engaged in a fairly robust competition and productivity study. It took them about 2.5 years to actually set the whole thing up. So how did they set it up? What were they going to study? It was going across the different states. They also set up at the same time, not only the study, but also once they got going, how they were going to monitor any competition or productivity changes and report on any progress. Then it took 10 years to actually do the actual review and the reform of 1,800 identified laws and regulations that were impacting productivity and competition. My question to you is, do you believe this type of a study is something we should be engaging here in Canada?
The Australian Productivity Commission, which is part of the larger effort that you were describing, is a good idea. I think that something along those lines in Canada would be helpful, just as we have other independent agencies that report on the status of our healthcare system, status of our education system, and so on. Having a steady voice out there that is continually looking at productivity issues, I think, would be helpful for simply giving us an additional lens through which to see many of the policies that get put in place, policies that get implemented by various governments that might have incidental effects on productivity. So I think Canada's probably in a good place to do that right now because, unfortunately, it's become a bit of a kitchen table topic. Productivity used to be quite a alarming word to people. Sounds like faster assembly lines, but what it's about is getting more reward for every hour you work, and who wouldn't want that?
Maybe one more. Okay, thank you so much.
Zerowitz to MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Salutations à tous les.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome all the witnesses. It's a very interesting panel. As Julie said, we would like to have more time to ask questions to each of you, but I assure you we're taking notes and we will use all your testimony in the pre-budget consultation. My questions will be for Mr. Mueller, but first I have two things I'd like to raise, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Peter Frediskatis and Rachel Bendayan for the follow-up when it comes to the update of the CMHC data. Peter had told me that I would receive the data early November at the latest. This is still October on Halloween Day, and I did receive an answer, so I thank them very much. And of course, that answer was something I would have liked to disseminate publicly, since it was addressed to the Finance Committee, and I checked with our clerk, Mr. Roger, who said, yes, I received it, but there's a mention of confidentiality that prevents him from distributing the document that I received to all members of the committee, and I would like to ask for colleagues' consent.
Somebody, it has been distributed to, it will be distributed to the members, all members, yes.
Donc,
With the confidentiality disclaimer there.
très bien. Donc, une demande spéciale.
Very good. So a special request from my friend Peter. We'd like to get these updates and be able to distribute them, make them public to citizens through the committee portal. So that mention of confidentiality would have to be removed. So when we have communications from the CMHC to that effect. Before I go on to questions for Mr. Mueller, I have a special request for Mr. Robson from the C.D. Howe Institute. Mr. Robson, you referred to the documents that you were going to publish, Mr. Mintz's study about the changes in the rate of inclusion. Mr. Mintz came before the committee. Since his conclusions are very different from what the government is presenting, be it the IMF or the department, I was wondering if he could share with us his sources and methods so that we could reproduce those calculations, since there's a great discrepancy. He told us that he was going to publish his document soon through your institute. So my request is, when Mr. Mintz's study is published through your institute, would it be possible to share it with the Finance Committee so that we can have access to the methodology? Thank you. Now, this brings me to my questions for Mr. Mueller. Thank you for being here. Last time you came before the committee, it was in Charlottetown, PEI, when we had consultations over a year ago before the budget. In your opening statement, Mr. Mueller, you mentioned the updated figures by Professor Kwa. Would it be possible to provide those figures to the community? Thank you for the question.
Thank you, and your colleagues, for the support of our industry. You're right, I did mention an update to Professor Wa's report. I think we've shared the last couple with this committee. And so this is the third iteration of the report. The first one was taking a look at what the potential impacts could be from this tax on manufacturing, on aircraft manufacturing specifically. And when I say aircraft, I mean jets and helicopters also. The second one was an initial review from the industry, the first year in. We are now 2 years into this tax on manufacturing. We have updated numbers from this committee also. So I want to thank all committee members. I think Mr. Davidson, you were instrumental in that, also asking some of these questions. So it is an update to that. I'd be happy once it's finalized to again share with the committee, of course.
Oui, ça serait grandement apprécié. Ça nous serait très utile.
That would be greatly appreciated and useful. In your statement, you mentioned 4,000 jobs that are threatened by this tax. Could you explain why?
Thank you again for the question. In my opening remarks, I had reiterated the results that we are now seeing from this tax. So, again, the government has only collected $15 million, but it's cost the industry $1.8 billion in revenue. And anytime you take out $1.8 billion in revenue from an industry, you're going to see jobs being impacted. Now, aerospace is a long-term supply chain. So over the next number of years, that is the impact when you take that kind of money out of the system. I would also say it's very concerning to us that we are seeing the impacts of jobs, and that is why the unions have been very vocal, also opposing this tax on the manufacturing of aircraft, because they too see that this is a job-killing tax that is in place. The other thing I'll just mention is that we see the taxes impacting jobs not only within the manufacturing but also throughout the supply chain right across the country. So the impacts are everywhere within the industry and quite concerning.
Merci.
And now to MP Davies, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. To QIA, if I could start with you, please. You wrote to the committee and said that the Government of Canada has committed to closing the Indigenous infrastructure gap by 2030. It is 2024, and no concrete plan has been put in place to achieve this goal. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and tell us a bit more? What is the Indigenous infrastructure gap? Can you quantify that in some way?
Thank you for the question. Yes. In terms of quantifying the gap that exists for Indigenous infrastructure, I'm not able to speak to that on a national context. We're in a position to speak to the realities of what's happening in our region within Nunavut, but also for Nunavut as a whole. And so by the creation of the Indigenous Community Infrastructure Fund, it was a first real opportunity in which Inuit, as a group of Indigenous people, were able to access a source of funding that enabled them to create a portfolio of infrastructure projects that would benefit from direct funding from the Government of Canada, that would enable our communities to begin the long process of addressing the severe infrastructure gap that has been plaguing our region and our territory since the creation of the territory.
So let me focus a bit then on Nunavut, because you also wrote that you wanted the government to continue to invest in a distinctions-based Inuit-led fund for Nunavut infrastructure at a rate of $70 million annually over 6 years. Two questions. Can you explain to us what distinctions-based means? And can you give us an example of maybe what the lack of infrastructure looks like in Nunavut and what the funding could be used for?
Sure. What we're referring to when we describe what we're recommending with distinctions-based, it essentially enables a category of funding that is specifically for, in our context, Inuit to be able to access. And because of the fact that we have a modern treaty in which our jurisdiction operates, not only the government of Nunavut, but we have Nunavut Inuit organizations that carry out very specific functions, but also are provided an opportunity to access or create opportunities for Inuit through partnerships with the Government of Canada, and more specifically by being able to access very specific scopes of funding. And so the traditional funding mechanisms in the past have only enabled very few opportunities, usually on a one-off basis for one specific project, and usually for the territory as a whole. By having a distinctions-based funding source, it enables Inuit to be able to think long-term and to be decisive on what types of infrastructure can create the foundation that is desperately needed in the territory.
Could you give us some idea of a successful example of this approach in action? And maybe, I think you've mentioned one project already. I think it was a hydro project. maybe an example of another project that you see could be funded if we were to allocate the proper resources?
Certainly, yes, and the Iqaluit Nukik Sautit Hydro Project is definitely one of those that could benefit from this type of funding arrangement with the Government of Canada. I can speak to some of the initiatives that we've been able to carry out by having distinctions-based funding available to us in our region alone. It's enabled us to create 3 daycares, 2 clean energy projects, a land development project, a multi-use facility in one of our larger communities, as well as putting funding towards a research and training center at the, North Baffin.
I'm wondering what you could tell us about housing in Nunavut. I mean, it's a crisis in lots of places in Canada. I understand that's not different than in Nunavut. Can you give us a picture of what the situation is on affordable housing in Nunavut and how an idea of the extent of the crisis and what you think we could do about it?
Certainly, it's been an ongoing issue as a huge part of the infrastructure gap that exists in the territory. It is a priority for all stakeholders in Nunavut. It's top of mind every day, not only for Inuit organizations, but also for the territorial government. This is an area that QIA is actually endeavoring to pursue to address by creating affordable housing in our communities. We've started in 5 of our 13 communities with hopes to be able to expand to all 13 communities to provide affordable housing options for Inuit at the local level, which would enable them to come out of territorial social housing, but also create an opportunity for them to build up the means to be able to pursue their own homes in the private market if that does become available in our communities. Majority of our communities have a very small private market. Iqaluit, the capital, has the largest private market, but the prices are so high that it is essentially unattainable for Inuit, even double income families, to be able to own their own home right now.
Davies, members, witnesses, we're moving into our second round of questions, and we're starting with MP Morans for 5 minutes.
Sergeant, I'll start with you. I become increasingly concerned during my time on this committee about the economic vandalism that is being committed on this country by this Liberal government. You know, the Governor of the Bank of Canada was here on Tuesday, and they had predicted a 1.5% increase in Canada's GDP. Just today, and I asked the Governor whether or not he thought the capital gains increase would affect that, and he refused to answer me. And I can see why, because just today, Stats Canada released a report that said that the GDP growth was flat at 1%, less than the bank had actually predicted. So I can see why he didn't want to talk about that. And, you know, my colleague, Mr. Kelly, talked about the fact that our GDP has declined in the last 8 out of 9 quarters, that the United States economy grew by 2.8% in the third quarter. Let me ask you the question that the Governor of the Bank of Canada refused to answer at this committee. Do you think that increasing the capital gains inclusion rate will further damage our flat economy?
I think there's no question that increasing the inclusion rate is going to be disincentive to investment in Canada. And weak investment has been a problem in the Canadian economy for many years now. We need to be thinking about ways to increase the incentive for people to invest, not reduce that incentive. And that is very much the source of our weak productivity growth.
And Mr. Housen, Robson, similar question to you. What's that? Oh. The Economist magazine also says that Canada is now poorer than Alabama. Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the U.S. Over the past 5 years, U.S. economic growth has been nearly double that of Canada's. And the Financial Post is reporting that Canada's standard of living decline is the worst in 40 years. Do you think, under the circumstances that all of these different sources have described, that increasing the capital gains inclusion rate is the right thing to do? at this point in time?
No, I do not think that increasing the capital gains inclusion rate is the right move. I've already spoken to the direction of its effects. The magnitudes are tough to calculate, but there's no way you can argue that it's going to do anything good. Because the luxury tax came up earlier, I'm going to mention that we've had a few tax changes in recent years that, to me, seem more motivated by maybe populist objectives than economic logic or the government's need for revenue. And I'd put the capital gains tax change into that category. I think one of the difficulties we have in Canada right now when it comes to economic confidence is that people see the tax system being used in ways that really make revenue raising a secondary consideration, and other goals more to the fore, and the luxury taxes in that category. Some of the taxes on financial institutions are in that category. The capital gains inclusion rate increases in that category. So I think that Canada needs a bit of a change of direction that would give people a bit more confidence that the tax system will be broad-based, fair, lower rates, and not subject to changes with changes in the direction of the political wind, because that makes people think twice about any kind of investment.
I agree with you entirely. In fact, I read your report. And in your report, you actually describe the array of tax changes that this government has been made as capricious and populist. I wonder if you could elaborate on why you think that is the case.
Well, what taxes really ought to be for, in many people's eyes, is funding government services. And to do that, you want to find tax bases that are broadly acceptable to the population, have broad bases, and preferably quite low rates. When you have very substantial increases in government spending driven by increases in operating costs, Tim Sargent alluded to this earlier, now we're seeing interest expense mounting again. There's a lot of strain on the tax system, and it's naturally that people look ahead with some concern about how high rates are going to go. If you also have this feature of the tax system that, rather than being used simply to raise revenue in the most acceptable and economically non-distorting way, it seems to be targeted towards whoever might be unpopular at the time, then that creates a very troubling environment for people who are wondering about making a long-term investment, because the environment that they're operating in is so clearly not reliable. It's not it's volatile.
Thank you.
Thompson, please.
Thank you, and welcome to all the witnesses. I actually would like to begin with you, Ms. Marin. I believe you may have a Newfoundland and Labrador connection. Yes, I thought that. So my lead, phenomenal project, removing Callowit from diesel to renewable energy. And I know when I've met with Growler Energy from my riding, who are a partner with you in this project, you are also involved in a series of other incredibly innovative, sustainable projects. And I think that shows tremendous leadership. I realize government is part of this, and I'm very proud of that. But would you speak to the partnerships and how you, from community-based place, have been able to work with partners and government, but really you are leading sustainable solutions for northern communities. And I think what you're doing is phenomenal.
Well, thank you very much. And it definitely is an exciting time for Inuit in particular, and really pursuing the opportunities that have been made available to Inuit through the Nunavut Agreement, but then also through the, the maturing of Nunavut as a territory, and really establishing our own relationships with government, with private industry, but also looking at the opportunities that each of our communities have in front of them to be able to be innovative, to bring our own solutions to the table, and to create circumstances or solutions that will be long-standing and beneficial for generations to come. And so there have been, this notion has been a long-standing idea in Iqaluit, recognizing and looking in other jurisdictions, Indigenous jurisdictions, but also internationally, what the benefits have been, and being able to try and find ways in which to get the ball rolling. There are many steps that have to be undertaken to be able to even get to the point that we're at right now. And a lot of engagement that has to take place with Inuit in our communities, because a lot of these large-scale projects do have an impact on our environment, will have an impact on the wildlife that we need to access. And so we have to bring forward a very tricky balance in the decision-making that ultimately needs to take place. And so the respect for that process really does determine the types of partnerships we do need to pursue to ensure that Inuit rights are upheld, but also that the benefits are coming forward for Inuit. Thank you.
In my conversations with the team at Growlers Energy, I was left with the impression that it was very much led by your community, which of course is how this should flow. But you're showing that model does work, and I want to just to really reference the work you're doing in marine renewable energy, the assessment, because it's so timely. So would you just speak briefly to how you've been able to establish this model of true collaboration, but really led within your community?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you'll allow, I'll ask my colleague to speak to that portion.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. I will also supplement the response in that through conversation with partnerships, we have worked closely with Muskrat Falls in understanding the dynamics of a hydroelectric power and the outputs that are needed in our region. I will say that in those discussions, the hydroelectric dam that we are proposing in and around Iqaluit is founded on our knowledge of the environment. And so Inuit in the community are vested in maintaining the opportunity to speak about Inuit cultural continuity, maintaining who we are as a people. And as a part of that process, as we look to expand opportunities in renewable energy, we're doing so in a way that allows us to share our knowledge, our Inuit Kalyumayat traditional knowledge, and reflect on that knowledge of the importance of where renewable energy can interact with the opportunity for us to maintain the opportunity to harvest from the land and interact in a way that respects Inuit ongoing. So over the last 3 years, we did a study and interacted with about 80 Inuit from Iqaluit, and that study allowed us to build on an understanding of the importance of where they traditionally go for camping, for hunting, and for maintaining our lifestyle. And so through that report, we were able to highlight the area that could be produced for hydroelectricity that would mitigate the opportunity and interaction of Inuit in the region.
And now to MP Samari.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Muller, je vous pose deux questions.
I have two questions for you, Mr. Mueller. With the 4,000 jobs at stake, this seems to be a tax on the manufacturing industry. Do you have any idea where these jobs are located and an idea of the income tax that will not be collected if these 4,000 jobs are not created or disappeared?
Yeah, for the question. These jobs are right across the country. We have, obviously a large aerospace manufacturing hub in the Montreal area, but this is not just there. This is right across the country. This is in Manitoba. This is in British Columbia. This is in Ontario. We see the effects right across the country. As an example, I was in Winnipeg last year speaking about the negative impacts of this tax, and the amount of companies that came up to me in Winnipeg saying it is impacting them, absolutely phenomenal. So it's something that is right across the country. We did ask Professor Watt to take a look at some of the tax implications, both from that lost revenue, but also from the workers' perspective. And again, these are good paying, family supporting jobs, oftentimes 30% higher wages than the average manufacturing And so we've seen across the board, if those 4,000 jobs are impacted, which we predict they will be, that would represent about $90 million in income tax for the federal government. So again, the tax is bringing in $15 million. It is costing the government $19 million to administer. It has lost the industry $1.8 billion in revenue, which represents $90 million in lost GST. And then when you take a look at the workers, which is of the utmost concern to me, because our aerospace industry is made up of workers. We do amazing things, but it's the people behind it. $90 million in lost income tax. So again, I don't see the benefit anywhere to this. There was a comment before about taxes being used to raise money for services. This is actually costing the government money. And when we take a look internationally, there's no other jurisdiction in the world that taxes aircraft manufacturing in this manner, number one. There is an example from the United States, and 2 years after this tax being implemented, they repealed it. Why? Because they're seeing the same negative impacts that we are seeing here. So my request again is for the committee to vocally and loudly please recommend that this tax be repealed from aircraft, because it is devastating to our industry right across the country.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mueller, I'd like to continue with you on that. I also had the benefit of having met with you and also with Bombardier, and I believe it was the International Association of Machinists, who all take the same position. Now, I've heard you clearly call for the repeal of the tax, which I understand is a 10% tax on the sale of an aircraft in Canada over $100,000. Do I have that right? Now, another proposal I heard from them that may achieve the same benefit. I understand that the tax is not payable if the use of the aircraft purchased is more than 90% used for business purposes. And so I've heard another option would be to reduce that to 50% business use. And I'm also told that sometimes when corporations or high net individuals purchase an aircraft, they can't use it all the time, so they'll put that aircraft into a lease pool. And the second request would be to automatically count all revenue from the lease pool as business use, because apparently now you have to keep track of every hour of the plane, and it's administratively a nightmare. So would that also be an acceptable solution to you if we reduce it to 50% and counted all lease pool revenue automatically as business use?
Thank you for the question, and also your interest in this file, because it is critically important. Our ask is to repeal the tax from aircraft manufacturing. There are certain areas that could be adjusted to help minimize that impact, but it will not eliminate that impact. And by the numbers that we've gone through and that we're seeing now by the government's own account, it does not make sense to me why the government would have a tax on aircraft manufacturing that is losing so much money out of the industry, $1.8 billion, but then also the tax revenue that goes along with it. So yes, you are correct. There are some areas that could be looked at, but it would not eliminate that. It would help to mitigate. But again, the impact is so drastic, we're recommending a repeal.
Spit this quickly on the record. I'll just say one sentence if I could. Bombardier told us that they were selling about 10 aircraft per year, and after the tax was brought in, it was reduced to 1. So that's how dramatic the impact was. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And now to MP Hallen for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Sargent, Canada, as we've heard, the GDP per capita has declined 8 out of the 9 last quarters, fallen 4% since 2022. In your opinion, is Canada basically in a GDP per capita recession?
Absolutely. And, normally we think of a recession as when the total national income falls. But of course, what matters to individuals is not the total sum of what the income is, but what they themselves get. And that's exactly what we've seen in Canada is just declining GDP per capita. And that's outside of a major recession, that's very unusual to see.
Canada's also fallen in global ranking for tax competitiveness. This especially happened after the job-killing capital gains tax hike was introduced by this Liberal NDP government. And also at the same time, they introduced the digital services tax as well that contributed to that and other taxes that they've been hiking up. And we know that the gap between U.S. and Canada's GDP per capita has only widened and to quite a significant level. In your opinion, does Canada having a carbon tax and the U.S. not having a carbon tax contribute to that gap?
I think so. I mean, Canada is getting a reputation as being a very high tax country, and it's discouraging investment. It's interesting. There's a recent RBC study on this. Canada, there used to be as much money flowing out of Canada as direct investment as came in. So there's a rough balance. Yep.
The amount of time I have a lot of questions to ask you. Would you also agree that the taxes being lower in the U.S. compared to Canada contribute to that widening gap between the U.S. and Canada?
International capital is very mobile and it moves around quite quickly, and Canada is uncompetitive, not just compared to the U.S., but quite a lot of other countries.
And are taxes and permitting costs being lower in the U.S. on the construction of new homes also contributing to that gap?
I mean, certainly if you're going to invest in housing in Canada, you're going to have a very long wait before you actually see anything get built, and that time is very significantly less in the United States.
Would it be fair to say that the higher taxes, as you mentioned, and longer permitting times are causing the decline in GDP per capita in Canada as well?
I think those are key contributors to the predicament that we find ourselves in.
The Prime Minister recently claimed that the increasing the capital gains taxes has what he says has no impact on whether people invest more or invest less. Does he have any idea what he's talking about?
Not going to speak for the Prime Minister, but I can tell you as an economist, when you increase taxation on investment and saving, you're going to get less investment and less saving.
Mr. Robson, I'll ask you the same thing. The Prime Minister claimed that increasing capital gains taxes has no impact on whether people invest more or invest less. Can you?
I've already said, so I'll repeat that the direction of the impact is very clear. You're going to get less. I'm echoing Tim Sargent. You'll get less saving and less investment. The higher capital gains tax on corporations is less visible than the one on individuals, but it's pervasive. And so that is going to reduce the return on investment and make the marginal project more attractive to undertake in the United States than in Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Sargent, I wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts on the government keeps saying that it's only 0.13% of the population that's going to be affected by this capital gains tax hike. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, how it's actually not? It does affect the middle class as well?
I mean, those figures are often based on a point in time, so in a given year, how many individuals are affected. But that's very different from how many individuals would be affected over the course of the period that they hold, over the course of their lifetimes, let's say. You're not necessarily buying or selling these assets, every year. You're holding, you're buying a cottage or something, and you're holding on for that for a longer period of time. So in fact, it'll actually be more people who are directly affected. And then everybody suffers if we have less saving and less investment because we're less productive as a country.
Chair, with my remaining time, I just wanted to put something on notice, if that's okay. I'll just want to put it on notice. Given that the Governor of the Bank of Canada refused to answer questions regarding the job-killing capital gains tax hike and its impact on the economy, that given it is the mandate of the Bank of Canada to promote the economic and financial welfare of Canada, and given that the committee heard that this tax hike will further harm the economy, the committee called the Governor of the Bank of Canada to return to answer questions on the economic impact of the capital gains tax hike and that his testimony be included in the pre-budget consultation report.
Thank you, MP Hallen. Now we're going to MP Sorbara, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me clearly? Just before I begin, just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Listen, it's great to hear all this testimony today. I don't see, I see Mr. Robson on screen, and obviously I don't see Mr. Sargent. I know he's there. Mr. Robson, Mr. Sargent, you're both two economists. Mr. Robson, I tend to read quite thoroughly the material that's put on the C.D. Howe Institute, and I see Sandra Pupatello, a good friend of mine, has now joined. So some great folks working there. But there's one thing I'm very disappointed about on both your commentary. Not one of you mentioned, neither one of you mentioned, as esteemed economists, or supposedly, that Canada's fiscal deficit is roughly 1%. And what is the United States fiscal deficit? If we want to make the comparison, it's over 7%. The comparison would be Canada would be running a deficit of over $300 or even $400 billion a year if we were doing exactly the same thing the United States was. Secondly, Mr. Sargent, I have to correct this record. The foreign direct investment, Lind, $2 billion, Dow, $10 billion, Honda, $15 billion, Stellantis, and the list goes on an FDI basis, on a per capita basis. You know the numbers as well as I do. Canada is doing very well on a per capita basis, actually number one. Also, the IMF. You folks, you two can get up tomorrow morning and write the IMF and tell them they're wrong. Because the IMF said this: increasing the capital gains inclusion rate. And we all know what surplus stripping is. And I'm surprised you guys don't mention surplus stripping and how that tax avoidance strategy works. By the IMF, increasing the inclusion rate improves the tax system neutrality with respect to different forms of capital income and is likely to have no, I repeat that, no significant impact on investment or productivity growth. Now, maybe the folks at the IMF are all wrong. Maybe you folks are all right, but you didn't mention both sides. You didn't talk about the fiscal deficits. You didn't talk about the neutrality and integration aspect on taxation. Somehow these aspects got left out of your testimony, and I'm just curious why. I'm very curious. So, with that, I would like to ask this question. On electric vehicles, has Canada attracted billions of dollars of investment here in the Canadian economy, including the $155 million investment that was announced right here in the city of Vaughan 2 days ago by a South Korean company creating 300 jobs? Also, no one mentioned that in last month. There were over 100,000 full-time jobs created here in Canada. And the other aspect you guys didn't mention, and I have to say this, if we've achieved a soft landing. Mr. Robson, has Canada achieved a soft landing, yes or no?
Canada is in a long period of stagnation. So
stagnation. So I have to correct. Stagnation is defined as when inflation and there's zero growth. Inflation is falling, interest rates are falling, the economy is growing moderately. And did you not see the forecast from in the Financial Times, both of you, that the Canadian economy will lead the G7 in economic growth in 2025 and be number 2 here without a 7% fiscal deficit? Am I the only one reading that stuff?
Chair, how would you like us to respond to this? There are a number of points on the table.
I'll give you 20 seconds each. Please, 30 seconds each.
Okay, the U.S. fiscal situation is terrible, and it's one of the reasons why I think it'd be good for us to make our fiscal situation better, because I think interest rates are likely to go up because of all that borrowing pressure. If you're worried about integration and consistency and surplus stripping, why would you make the inclusion rate different in different places? The problem that creates is much worse than the problem it was notionally supposed to address. I do think the IMF is wrong.
Only 12% of corporations actually are impacted by the capital gains inclusion rate. And the marginal effective tax rate for manufacturing investment here in Canada is, I'll even send you the chart myself, is actually the lowest in the G7. There are many, many things with this country that are blessed. They're blessed with. There are many things we need to work on. Absolutely. This is Canada's decade, and I'll repeat that over and over again. Everything we've done on AI to hydrogen to green to electric vehicles and so forth is going the right way. And I'm so happy that 1 million Canadians have now gone to the dentist and gotten the care that they need. It may not be a social program that Conservatives want. And we know, I'll say this, we know the Conservatives have said they're going to cut the Housing Accelerator Fund to accelerate housing here in the city of Vaughan, in Richmond, in Markham, and that's real dollars being put to work here in those cities. Confident governments and confident countries invest in their people, and that's exactly what we're doing. And I'm disappointed neither one of you talked about fiscal deficits in the United States versus Canada and our fiscal position in our AAA credit rating. All you did, especially to Mr. Sargent from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, was just talk down the economy. I thought you were sitting on the opposition benches for a couple of minutes, and I'm trying to be non-neutral as an economist. Chair, I'll turn it back to you. I think my 5 minutes is up. I wish to thank everybody. Happy Halloween.
And now we are moving to round three. We do have enough time to go through a full round three today. So I've got MP Kelly for next 5 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. Given that Mr. Cervera didn't allow, he challenged two of our witnesses and then wouldn't allow a very small reply before interrupting Mr. Robson and didn't let Mr. Sargent get in at all. I think that some of these points need to be addressed by the actual witnesses today, because this is what we do at the committee. We call witnesses that provide evidence that form part of the report. MPs don't provide the evidence for reports. So, Mr. Sargent, do you want to start and maybe tackle some of the points that were raised?
Sure. Just quickly going down the list. I mean, firstly, the United States government gets to borrow in US dollars, which are the world's currency. And so they have a lot more way to go before they run out of fiscal road than Canada, which is a much smaller economy, and it's only borrowing in Canadian dollars. I didn't actually finish my thought on foreign direct investment, so I didn't actually say anything about it. But had I been able to continue, what I would have said is that, yes, Canadian direct investment foreign direct investment in Canada has increased, if you look relative to the US, but it has been dwarfed by the amount of money that's actually leaving the country. So we are actually now have a net deficit on our investment relationship with the United States, and these numbers are in a recent Royal Bank of Canada report.
Sorry, if I may, on that point, do you have a number of that deficit of yes? So there's money coming in, but there's much more money leaving. What is the total of that investment deficit?
So we have 600 billion coming in, $1 trillion going out. So that deficit is 400 billion in 2022.
Okay, so we've actually, so despite what we heard from Mr. Sorbera, we're actually down $400 billion in net direct investment. Okay,
exactly.
Thank you. I'll let you continue if you had other points to make.
I guess my last point is investment in electric vehicles. We're certainly not seeing that yet in the investment numbers.
Chair,
if that shows up, that's great. But I'm talking.
Chair, can I do a
point of order? Point of order. There's a point of order.
I wish to comment on Mr. Sargent's testimony in terms of the foreign direct investment, because you can measure Canada's foreign net investment position in different manners. And Mr. Sargent is measuring in one way. It's not
everyone. Calm down. Way. Calm down, everybody.
Oh.
Thank you, MP Sorbera. It's not a point of order. Maybe you'll have an opportunity after, but we're going back to MP Kelly.
Sorry, please continue, Mr. Sargent. Okay, with that, I'll maybe, with the time I have remaining, I think Mr. Robson may have had a further comment or two on some of the things that were raised in the previous intervention.
Well, I'll just continue on the topic. Foreign direct investment, like Canadian direct investment abroad, tends to happen in big lumps. So it's very important that we look over a reasonable period of time and not seize on a single quarter. In general, though, I take the side of Mr. Sargent in saying that the trends have been a bit unfavorable. One of the biggest things that foreigners are investing in when they buy Canadian assets is government debt. And it seems to me that that's a problem because unlike the sorts of assets that would produce incomes and growth in Canada, all that their purchases of government debt are going to produce is interest outflows. So I do think that it would be a good idea for governments to absorb less of the saving in our domestic economy. That would create more room for domestic investment to be funded domestically. And so I do think that the size of the federal government's borrowing and provincial government borrowing as well, notwithstanding that it's less than the United States, is a problem for us and something that we'd be better off. We've had 10 years of continual deficits and very rapid growth of debt federally. And over those 10 years, we've not seen a lot of economic progress. And under previous governments, including those of Prime Ministers Chrétien and Harper, when the federal fiscal situation was better under control, we had better investment and we had better economic growth. So I think those things are related.
Thank you.
Got a minute.
Oh, well, yeah. That's just thank you for clarifying all those points. And so, if it'd be fair to again summarize to say that we have the growth of government and government deficits that are choking out and are absorbing the savings rather than resulting in investment in the economy. We have regulation that is preventing projects from being completed. Mr. Sargent has pointed out that nothing has been approved under C-69. Everything is just stuck in the bureaucracy of approval. And we have rising taxes and shrinking living standards. Is that a fair summary of the current course of this government?
Yes, Canadian. If I may just quickly comment, yes. We've had quite a bit of discussion in these hearings this session just now on the fact that GDP per capita, income per capita has been falling. I will point out that the capital stock per worker, which is the consequence of low investment rates, has now fallen for 7 straight years. That hasn't happened since the 1930s. And it would be very surprising if you could sustain higher living standards when your capital stock per worker is falling. If you look across the world, the countries with high capital stocks per worker, the worker who's digging with an excavator, they have higher incomes, higher productivity than the countries with low capital stock per worker where they're digging with shovels. And we want to be digging with excavators, not shovels.
Thank you, MP Kelly. And now to MP Sorbara.
Thank you, Chair. Question to Mr. Robson. In terms of you're an esteemed economist, sir, and I do have much respect for you and everything. One of the things I believe in is obviously, if I can make the analogy, is if you're a hockey team, you can only put so many players on the ice. And we know the Toronto Maple Leafs have not won the Stanley Cup since 1967, if I remember correctly. So you want to make the players on the ice and invest in them and make them as good as possible so they continue to win. In terms of the Canadian worker, investing in them, ensuring that, now that we've the immigration plan for 25 to 27, which will see a large reversal in this GDP per capita conversation. And some of the economists on Bay Street have said this, and you know this, and I know this, where we'll have increasing GDP per capita. And remember, businesses wanted a lot of these temporary foreign workers. We've had commentary on the immigration plan levels from businesses saying, please don't do this. Right? We want businesses to invest in capital, to invest in human capital and the physical capital stuff. What would you recommend, Mr. Robson, in terms of how we get that human capital stock, that elusive economic growth or productivity, which is standard of living, get that up? If you can recommend 2 or 3 policies, I would love to hear them, sir.
Well, you mentioned the analogy of a hockey team. So I'll say that when you're not equipping your workers well, and at the moment, investment rates in Canada per worker are about half what they are in the United States. That is a dramatic decline from the sort of 70, 80 cent range that we saw a decade ago. So we do have a big problem there. We are putting our players on the ice with the old Eaton's catalogs for shin pads instead of modern equipment. One of the things that I think we could do, it's expensive, but we need a bit of a jolt. I think we might have a general investment tax credit because that would really catch people's attention. It'd be an unambiguously positive move. My former colleague, Jack Mintz, would object quite rightly that it doesn't have completely neutral effects as to different types of investment. But I think that a temporary move along those lines would be a very strong signal, and it would provide a lot of, as I say, a jolt to the economy, and even just the competitive impact of your counterparts tooling up, I think would make a difference. So you asked for a recipe. There's one ingredient.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robson. I do wish to say, when you talk about investing in workers, the onus is also on Canadian corporations who, if I look at the profitability levels, and StatsCan has them, have done, pretty decent in the last couple of years. If you want to look at ROE or ROIC, return on invested capital, return on equity, they also need the onus to invest in their workers, which many of them do, and I applaud them, and I love wealth creation and the whole bit. But the onus is on also Canadian companies investing in workers, and you're one of the saying doing a general investment tax credit. We do know fiscal finances are limited. We've had, if you think about what the official opposition is asking for, two policies that they've brought up, cost the fiscal purse, roughly the OAS measure and the removal of the GST on new builds. If you add those two measures together, you're roughly getting almost $8 billion of new tax expenditures. And then, but how are you supposed to pay for that? And so, there are limitations on what a government can and can't do with regards to the fiscal purse. And I agree with you on that measure there. Chair, how long do I have in time?
Minute and a half.
Okay. Following up with, I do want to stick. Actually, I do. If I could just move on. I know Mr. DeCandida is there. Mr. DeCandida, welcome from Chin Radio and Broadcasting. Obviously, the Lombardi family here in the city of Toronto and here up in the New York region have been pillars of the multicultural broadcasting community for decades. And their legacy lives on. I do want to wish Lenny, I know it's his birthday today, so I do want to wish him a wonderful birthday and the best to him and his wife and the family. Mr. DeCandida, excuse me, the environment for multicultural media here in Canada, and please be as frank as you need to be. The environment, how would you just characterize the environment, sir?
Well, there is a need to sensitize all the advertising agencies out there to think outside the box, to include multicultural, radio and television broadcasters, because right now they're turning their heads. We are always offering statistical data from Statistics Canada, census data. We also have live data because of the streaming that we offer, and we can show how many listeners we have on the streaming platforms, which are clearly identified when we download the analysis. We definitely need the government, however, to also direct all these agencies to spend more money with us, because they don't. They really give us a very minimum amount of dollars to cover a lot of ethnic groups. And like I said in my opening statement, Chin Radio offers more than 50 languages. And we are the radio that is available to people that don't have access to the mainstream media, either because they don't understand it or because they don't really, like the programming that they hear. So we bring into their homes.
Mr. DeCandida, I couldn't agree with you more.
Mr. Barr, no, we're actually well past the time, okay. now. So, thank you, and thank you, Mr. DeCandida. Okay, so now we are going to hear from MP Samari.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, question pour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Mr. Mueller about the tax that targets your industry. You mentioned that the reputation of the industry in Canada is affected. Do you have an example of that?
Again, it's of great concern to me. We have something in Canada that we should be celebrating, promoting, and figuring out how we can grow the industry, and that's the aerospace industry. Again, 200,000 jobs right across the country. We're one of the very few countries from a certification perspective that can build a plane from nose to tail and certify it and put it into production. So a lot of countries internationally are jealous of what we have, want what we have, want the workers, want the technology, want the know-how. And when I go and speak internationally and we talk about what's happening from our individual countries' perspective, and I talk about this tax on manufacturing, the response I get is twofold. One is, why are they doing that to your industry? Our governments are doing everything they can to promote this industry. And then the second response they have is, well, that's good because it's driving sales and revenue to their industries into their countries. And so I think I'd mentioned it before, but we're the only country that I am aware of that has this kind of a tax on aircraft manufacturing. And every time we've seen it happen in the past, there's one clear example in the United States. I think it was 2 or 3 years after, because of the negative impact, it was repealed. So again, we're 2 years. We're seeing the real world results, negative results of this tax, and we're asking that the committee and the government take steps to repeal it.
Et j'espère que vous serez entendu.
Well, I hope you will be heard. You talked about the importance of having an industrial strategy in Canada for aerospace. We're the only country that's concentrated in aerospace but doesn't have one. Before I got here, I met François-Philippe Champagne, the Ministry of Science and Innovation. I reminded him of that. He says, we're working hard. In your opinion, what should he be doing when working harder to adopt that kind of strategy?
Answer, Mr.
Well,
Mueller.
we're very thankful to this committee for recommending the need for a national industrial strategy. We're very pleased with Minister Champagne's commitment for that strategy. A strategy is absolutely essential, both to send that signal internationally, but to identify aerospace as strategic, because it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
MP Davies. Thank you. Mr. Robson, when the Mulroney Conservative government raised the capital gains inclusion rate from 50% to 66 and change in 1988, as was just done recently, what was the impact on jobs and investment?
I do not know. I can look into that and get back to you, but I don't have it in front of me.
Surprised you then to know that in 1990, 2 years later, they raised it again to 75%. So either it had no negative impact or they weren't paying attention to the economy at all. Would that be correct?
I think that it's important to remember that we had very high tax rates in a number of areas back in the 1980s. And one of the things that was done very markedly under the governments of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin was to lower tax rates in a variety of areas. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Canada's economic performance improved. And in fact, the gap between our living standards and those elsewhere in the OECD and in the United States closed over a period of years. So I don't think high tax rates are helpful.
Ask you about high tax rates. I mean, it's so funny. I've had economists come to this committee who, with all sorts of numbers about what's going to happen to the Canadian economy in terms of investment and lost jobs over the rise in capital gains inclusion rate that just happened weeks ago, and the best data available to economists, you would think, would be when we last did it in 1988 in the real world, and yet nobody seems to have studied that. I don't understand that. I mean, that strikes me as willful blindness where someone's not paying attention to what happened last time because the data does not support the position being advocated today. But my last question is going to be to Ms. Mearns. Ms. Mearns, thank you for bringing the voice of the North here. Decisions made about the economy in the South here often have grave impacts. I'm wondering what you can tell us about the impact in terms of the climate crisis on the environment. What are you seeing in Nunavut in terms of the changes to the environment up there as a result of activities in the South?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's a narrative that more Canadians are becoming familiar. The impacts of climate change that have a direct impact on Inuit and other Indigenous groups that live in the Arctic. It is certainly impacting our ability to continue our traditional ways of life, harvesting and traveling across the land and the sea ice. But it's also creating a greater interest globally as to what's available in the Canadian Arctic, with minimal engagement from southern Canada on ways in which Canada is going to support Inuit and Indigenous peoples in our communities with that heightened global interest in our area. It's going to continue to bring long-standing proposals for long-standing investments from other countries to either address infrastructure issues. It's going to increase traffic in our waters. And so there has to be stronger dialogue, north and south, east and west within Canada, on how we're going to ensure the safety of the people that live there, but also to ensure that the environment is protected in a way that can be managed for generations to come. Thank you.
MP Davies, and now we'll go to MP Morantz. Oh, sorry, MP Howland. 5 minutes, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sargent, I agree with everything you've said today, except for one thing that I cannot agree with you on. When you said in your opening statement that it takes 10 to 15 years to get a mine built, but by the government's own admission, it takes 25 years in this country to build one. But it all ties back to the overregulation and taxes that you talked about. You know, when Canadians are watching this, like, you know, they hear from the government how rosy of a picture that they want to make it seem what Canada is like. You know, if you were to hear Mr. Sorbera's unhinged rant or what they talk about, like, Canadians have never had it better. But a really damning stat came out this year that food bank usage is above 2 million people now in a single month, in the month of March, and it's doubled since 2019. Canadian standards of living is getting worse, and that's clear to see with GDP per capita decline. Can you put this into more common terms for those Canadians watching? You know, that Tim Hortons worker working in Timmins or other people who work. What does that mean that Canadian standards of living are declining?
Quite simply, it just means there's just less income to go around. Typical families just don't have as much money to buy food or spend on rent or go on holiday or one of these kind of things that people want to do.
Mr. Robson, can I get your feedback on that as well?
Well, yes, it's very much as Tim Sargent just said. When real earnings are declining, it means that what you're getting from your work relative to the food, clothing, shelter, and other things that you want to buy, it's getting less adequate to cover it. And certainly we are, when you see year after year of that kind of decline, it pinches people. We noticed it very much because of the increases in prices, but people are now looking back to sort of pre-COVID times and realizing what a difference there is and what they're able to afford now and what they were able to afford then. So I think it's a problem in terms of material living standards, and I think it's also a problem in terms of people's optimism about the future.
To both of you, Mr. Sargent, you first, and then Mr. Robson, in spirit of this being a PBC, can you give us some testimony or input on what measures can be taken today that wouldn't cost anything that would help Canada's productivity?
I mean, I would go to regulatory reform. You know, we often think of government in terms of spending and taxes, but regulations reach everywhere in the economy. Interprovincial trade barriers, for instance, are a huge barrier in Canada. The IMF has called that out. We talked about the regulatory system for major projects. I mean, that costs Canada investment dollars. And just around the country, there's so many businesses just complaining about red tape.
I would cite similar things. I think that reducing the size of the federal government would save money and in some cases would help to spur growth by just freeing up resources elsewhere. Regulation, a lot of the housing problems are not the federal government's remit, but it's an astonishing thing when you look at the increases, the improvements in technology of home construction over years, that the time to complete a house has actually gotten longer. And that seems to be a consequence of regulation. Interprovincial trade barriers, I would mention as well. And just to throw something out that hasn't come up yet, but I think is quite important as we think about ways of getting more investment, including from pensions funds in Canada. The Canadian government has assets that are underperforming, including airports, for example. You would not lose any money by making those available for private investment, and I think it would improve infrastructure, it would improve our supply chains, and generally give the economy a bit of a boost.
Mr. Robson, you talked about government deficits before. Can you expand a little bit further? The PBO recently said that the government is going to blow through its $40 billion budget by $7 billion. This is a trend. This is not something new for this government. Can you tell us the impact on what that has when it comes to investment?
Well, Tim Sargent alluded earlier to the fact that it can be appropriate to run deficits during recessions, but when the economy is operating at capacity, and clearly it was operating beyond capacity at times recently because we had a huge increase in inflation, though that government borrowing is going to be taking away resources that could have been used for investment. So I think that one of the problems we have in Canada, and certainly have had over a number of years now, is that for every dollar of income that we generate in the economy, we consume a certain amount as households. There's a lot that's been invested in residential construction with population growth, and we're very glad to have had that. But after you've done those two things, you don't have a lot left for non-residential investment. And if the government is borrowing money that might have been used for investment and it's turning into consumption instead, then that's one of the reasons that we are getting poorer. And I will just mention with respect to fiscal targets, I'm very old-fashioned. I think, as in the City Howe Institute, we're not for profit. What do we aim for on the bottom line? You don't aim for a deficit. As soon as you've gone below zero, it means that people aren't taking the money as seriously. You don't have to justify an extra dollar here with what you would cut somewhere else. So I think that just that running deficits all the time really undermines budgetary discipline. And I think it's one of the reasons why we've seen such big spending increases without much for it in many cases. The CRA has increased its headcount enormously. Are they better at processing our taxes than they were? They're not.
Thank you, MP.
Thank you.
And this will be our final questioner, and it'll be MP Zarowitz for the last 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank again all of our witnesses for coming out today. I just want to start off maybe, Mr. Chair, for 2 seconds, just to say very disappointed by Mr. Hallam's new motion that's before us. I think it misrepresented, I think, what the governor was trying to do. I think he was trying to not respond to any policy decisions, but I think he was very, very fair in his testimony. I'm also going to say, I want to add to some of the comments that Mr. Serbar had mentioned around our economy. Mr. Robson, I read a lot of your stuff and agree with some of it. I will say to you, the productivity issues that we've had is not just over the last 10 years. They've been over the last 30 years at least. We have a lot of work to do. And unlike what my Conservative colleagues are saying, I don't believe everything's perfect in our Canadian economy. I will say that it's really important to highlight that over the last 10 years, we've had to grapple with a massive, massive pandemic. We've had huge geopolitical changes. We have 2 wars going on. We still have continued impact on global supply chains. We have climate change that's underway, and all of that is impacting all economies, and I would say most economies are still recovering after the pandemic. And in fact, Canada is actually doing far better than most in terms of jobs, in terms of growth, and in terms of our debt levels. Doesn't mean that we don't have a lot to do and that we don't have some challenges. And maybe a question I have to Mr. Mueller, one of the things you mentioned was around SHRED. If you had one recommendation that would be helpful to the aerospace sector, one change that we could make to SHRED that would be helpful, what would it be?
I would say maintain it. There's a lot of talk going on right now of reviewing it. It's incredibly important to maintain that program for our industry. So maintain it.
Thank you. I would say, though, I hear a lot from Canadian innovators and smaller companies, and they say a lot of it goes to more multinational and foreign companies as opposed to Canadian companies, and I think that is something we need to look at. Mr. Robson, it's great that I know that there's been a lot of talk today about interprovincial trade barriers. I've had a motion before this committee, both in the last session and in this session, and no one's agreed to actually look at it. Interprovincial trade barriers is a massive undertaking. One of the key recommendations that have come before this committee is for us to actually begin with creating a registry. So having it very transparent, what are the interprovincial trade barriers, so that we could have it from a transparent perspective, see what the list is and start to tackle it. Would you agree that that is a good next step to start tackling interprovincial trade barriers?
One of the comments that I often hear about interprovincial trade barriers is that it's the nitty-gritty, tiny details like the specs for fire extinguishers on trucks, axle weights, and so on. And this just makes it an unattractive thing to tackle. my response is, well, that's where the payoff is. So for the federal government to take the lead when it comes to compiling the information, sharing the information, and then of course using its power to lean in, it sounds like a good idea. I don't know the specific proposal you're referring to, but I do want to underline some of this work is not very glamorous. Some of it is very technical, but that's the level on which you need to proceed if you really want to make headway in this area. And the federal government can look at its own measures that sometimes fragment the internal market. It'll often follow provincial rules that it doesn't need to follow. Supply management came up earlier. So there you've got a fragmentation of the internal market that the federal government supports. I know that's a very delicate one, but the federal government itself can do a number of things. And anything that helps us through that massive technical detail, I think has to be helpful.
So you think a registry would be very helpful?
As I understand what you're saying, I don't know the specifics of that proposal, but on the basis of what I understand from what you've said so far, it does sound like a good idea. Thank you.
Yes, this is definitely not a trick question. I will tell you, I was meeting with Fertilizer Canada, and they said that the truck weight limits are different in every single province in this country, and that causes them difficulty in terms of moving across our country as opposed to sending things to the United States. And then on top of that, if you are a truck and going between Quebec and Ontario, you actually have to change your tires because the width limits are different in Quebec than they are in Ontario. And those are just two of the insane things that we have underway here. And I think that a simple registry that actually starts outlining some of not only the regulatory issues, but I'd also say the interprovincial trade barriers that are stopping us, I think that transparency will actually move us to some immediate action. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Zerowitz, and we feel your passion for productivity and those interprovincial trade barriers. We hear it all the time here. We did have a couple of special guests here. We have PS Peter Fragascados and MP Earl Dreschen, who are with us here today. But on behalf of the and Scott, and MP Scott Davidson, yes. So I just on behalf of our entire Finance Committee, we want to thank our excellent expert witnesses that came before us for your testimony for this pre-budget consultation in advance of Budget 2025. We thank you very much and all the best with the rest of your evening. Thank you. We're adjourned.